want to ask you, how do we fix this influx of dark money? What do we do?
Well, I see it a little bit differently. The money's bad, and we understand that, and we understand what it represents. But that, to me, is the symptom of the problem. Take, for instance, the military-industrial complex. That's the problem. And as long as you have the military-industrial complex, they're going to do it above the table, legally, illegal, or whatnot, but they're going to get their people into Congress to spend more money and start more wars.
Few politicians in U.S. history have had the kind of impact that former Congressman Ron Paul has. And Dr. Paul joins us now, live from Texas, to talk about this year's midterms. Now, Dr. Paul, thank you for being here. I want to ask you first and foremost, one of the untold storylines of this year will be the independent and libertarian candidates who have polled pretty high and have fought to break through so many restrictions. So what are you seeing?
Well, I think it seems like this will be a very good year, better than it has been in the past, but we're still locked in on this mentality, that people will think positively on these other options, but when it gets down to the wire, they say, oh, I got to vote for the lesser of two evils, and they end up voting that way. So we have to wait and see if there is a breakthrough, which rather disgusting. I mean, this whole idea that a good candidate that's rating well in the polls can't get in the debate, that's where the corruption really is. It's a monopoly of a one-party system. They claim it's two parties, but it's a monopoly of a one-party system, and they don't even allow a second option. And what do they do with our young people? They send them all around the world, getting involved in wars and telling other people how they have to have democratic elections. And then they have the elections, and we won't accept the people they elect. But here at home, we don't have true democracy. We have a monopoly of ideas that are controlled by leaders of two parties. And though they call it two parties, it's really a one philosophy.
Now, Dr. Paul, you were the Libertarian Party nominee in 1988 before you went back to the Republican Party and then made two presidential runs as a Republican candidate. Do you believe that in the coming decade we're going to see third-party candidates take national offices, maybe in the Congress, in Senate? What do you expect to see in terms of that, or do you think that's just still a long way off?
I think it's a long way off. I hope your suggestion is right, but they are very tenacious on clinging to power. And they're not, if a third-party person gets anywhere along, they're going to do everything that they can to stop that from happening. So I think it's a tough job. I think everybody should keep doing it, the people who are sick and tired of Republicans and Democrats. And according to the poll, about 80% of the people are sick and tired of Republicans and Democrats, yet they don't go and opt out for another decision. So I think it's either working in that arena or working to try to influence both parties. And I do a little bit of that because, when I worked for, more transparency of the Federal Reserve, we got a lot of Democrats and Republicans to look into this and support that position. So there's two ways you can do it. Fight for competition, fight to get rid of the monopoly of the Republicans and Democrats, or you try to influence people with ideas and infiltrate both political parties, because this is our problem right now, is Republicans and Democrats both endorse Keynesian economics, and they both endorse foreign policy interventionism and the wars overseas, and that's why we're in this mess today.
Now, Dr. Paul, marijuana legalization is on the ballot in 3 more states this election cycle, with Alaska, Oregon, and D.C. looking at recreational marijuana. So what do you see in terms of the new black market created by overregulation and taxation?
Well, I think this is what's waking up a lot of people, and this is another tool that's available. The marijuana issue has been taken over by individuals at the state level and essentially nullifying the federal law. So that is another way to attack the monopoly system in Washington, D.C. And there's going to be more of that as time goes on, because I expect to see a time when there's economic chaos a lot worse than we had in 2009 and 10 with so much chaos, and people will have to resort to taking care of themselves and governing themselves at a local level. So I see some good signs there that the people are waking up. It's just that the political system is so hard to crack that all of a sudden we're not going to see fairness in the elections and allowing people to get on the ballots.
But Dr. Paul, let me just reiterate the last part of that question there, because yes, I agree with what you're saying in terms of what the states are doing, but at the same time, we do have an issue where in a lot of these states, there is an over-regulation of marijuana, and the taxation is so high that, for instance, in Colorado, they're creating somewhat of a new black market for people who say, well, I can't afford to go through this the way the state is doing it, and it's still illegal for them to grow it themselves. So at what point do the states wake up, or do individuals wake up and say, you know what, we need true freedom here? Because right now, even with the laws that have been passed, there is not true freedom on this issue.
Right, and I think you're absolutely right on the point you're making. And that's exactly how they made marijuana illegal in 1937. They didn't just say marijuana is illegal. They put a horrendous tax on it, and that created the black market. Then they had to crack down on the black market. So yes, immediately, if the regulations and taxes are too high, you're going to have a black market. Not in a year from now, you'll have a black market immediately. And I haven't followed that closely enough to know whether that's happening. But this is why you need people who will defend liberty in a purest form as possible. Because if they just say, well, we're going to take this away from the federal government and let the states do it, you have authoritarianism at the state level too, and there's all sorts of people who get behind these kind of movements. You know, you take an industry like the alcohol industry might be behind it because they don't want any competition with marijuana. So yes, I think this is the case. And this is why you should argue the case for the purest case for liberty as possible, because there's a tendency for politicians, people in government, want to throw their weight around and use their power to over-regulate no matter what the law says.
I appreciate what you said there about finding people who will defend liberty, you said, in the purest form possible. I want to talk to you quickly about ISIS. Now, this is not going to get a lot of discussion throughout the night, but in a lot of campaign ads around the country, we saw politicians who were talking about ISIS, and it was more of this politics of fear. Do you believe the country is shifting back toward this kind of warmongering policy that Americans, we kind of thought they were getting tired of even as recently as a year ago? Are we slipping back into that politics of fear?
Yeah, you know, a year ago we were doing pretty well. We had built up a resistance against Obama, saying, well, it's time to take out Assad, and the Congress didn't go along with it because the people weren't anxious for it, and the thing fell down. But now, all of a sudden, because the whole foreign policy has backfired, and the radicals got hold of a lot of our weapons, they were able to show a lot of force in both Iraq and Syria. So therefore, they can build up the fear. Just look at how did they get the American people to go along with a war against Saddam Hussein? It was built up fear, weapons of mass destruction. He's ready to kill us, you know, and that was able to do it. So yes, they use fear all the time. And once again, if they had a strict principle of saying that we have no business getting involved in the internal affairs of other nations, stay out of entangling alliances, don't be the policeman of the world, beside we're broken, we can't afford it, and beside the foreign policy is a total failure, it always backfires on us. And the people who promote these wars have an agenda and a special interest involved. The people need the information, but they can't get it from the TV. It looks like the war propagandists are very, very powerful. And you put the government together and the national media and so much else, they usually sway the people by building all this fear. And I think that the only tool we have is to do our best with alternative type of communication, and in particular, I think the internet is very helpful in that regard.
Dr. Paul, what type of ramifications do you think tonight's elections will have in 2016?
To make him what?
The ramifications of tonight's elections, the outcomes that we're going to see, whichever way it goes, how is it going to play out in 2016 then? What will happen? Well,
I think it's way too early to do that, but they'll talk about that tomorrow for sure, because I know that they started talking about the presidential race even 2 years ago. So I don't know. I think it's way too early. I just you know, under the conventional wisdom of the people who will be elected today and the changes, I don't have high hope that anything is going to change. And for the most part, except with a few exceptions, and that there are some people there that are very, very good, but they're a minority, whether it's my son or Justin Amash. These people just don't have the clout that you need under current conditions to have a shift of total attitude. And so I think the status quo is pretty strong right now, and I imagine the status quo is going to win the election tonight.
Congressman Paul, we want to expand the conversation here. Now, the Center for Responsive Politics predicts that the 2014 election cycle will cost up to $4 billion by the time it's all said and done. However, nearly $1 billion of that is coming from dark money or donations by large-scale nonprofits that don't have to disclose the source of those funds. So essentially large donors who basically circumvent campaign finance laws. And joining us now to discuss with Dr. Paul, more about the money in politics is John Bonifaz. Now, John is the founder of the National Voting Rights Institute and an attorney and political activist specializing in constitutional law and voting rights. So thank you for being here together. We're going to expand the conversation so that all four of us can participate. But I'm going to start by asking you, John, almost $4 billion. That's a tremendous amount of money. So what's the bulk of that being spent on? And is it things like staffer salaries or, elocution classes, advertising? Where does it go? I mean, it's just so much, $4 billion.
It is an enormous amount of money, and I'm now actually with Free Speech. I'm now with Free Speech for People, which is leading a campaign to take on this whole question of big money in politics. But much of that money is going to advertising, saturating the airwaves and drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. Congressman Paul rightly said 2 years ago, after a comment was made by Mitt Romney that corporations are people, my friend, that corporations are in fact not people, they're artificial creatures of the state. And yet the United States Supreme Court decided in 2010 that corporations are people with political speech rights, unleashing this unlimited amount of corporate dollars and big money dollars into our elections, exacerbating a problem that clearly existed before that ruling, but has made matters much, much worse. And that's why, frankly, we need a constitutional amendment to overturn that ruling and to end this system of big money dominance of our elections.
Important for people to remember that the Supreme Court is not the final say on a lot of these issues. The people are the final say. But I do want to show you this chart. These are the top 10 contributors to midterm elections this year. Karl Rove behind American Crossroads, which has contributed the most money, no surprise there, a little over $47.6 million. You have the Senate Majority PAC, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, National Rifle Association, kind of the usual characters there. But then you also have the National Association of Realtors, or the Next Gen Climate Action. Those are PACs that most people wouldn't expect to see.
Absolutely not.
Where's that money coming from? John.
Well, I mean, I think what we're seeing is the money's coming from both conservative quarters and it's coming from those on the left side who have significant funds to spend. But really, at the end of the day, it's coming from the top 1% of our society. Regardless of their ideology, we're talking about the wealthiest few of America who are dominating this campaign finance system. This is not a system open to all. The vast majority of Americans do not have the money it takes to contribute to candidates, to run for office themselves, and that's why we're seeing them locked out of the political process. The 99% of us are locked out of what is a wealth primary that occurs before the actual election and that effectively determines what our debate is going to be about and who gets to compete and win.
Dr. Paul, I want to ask you, how do we fix this influx of dark money? What do we do?
Well, I see it a little bit differently. The money's bad, and we understand that, and we understand what it represents. But that, to me, is the symptom of the problem. Take, for instance, the military-industrial complex. That's the problem. And as long as you have a military-industrial complex, they're going to do it above the table, legally, illegal, or whatnot, but they're going to get their people into Congress to spend more money and start more wars. So that is really the symptom. The same way with, the medical industrial complex, the same way with the educational system. They all have something to sell. So as long as government is so big, the money's going to be spent. The concern I have about attacking money per se is I want to undo all that. I want to make sure there is no special money in there, but I want to be able to spend money to do that. So why limit me and my right to spend money to lobby for reducing all this spending? So I think that you have to be careful on the regulations that you put, because if we had a constitutional government, if we had men and women of integrity that wouldn't take any of these bribes, you don't have to worry about it. But the problem is nobody up there cares about the Constitution, and they end up being there because of the money. So if you don't change the system and just regulate the money, you're going to regulate some money. You might regulate money for people who defend the Second Amendment. And I wouldn't be for that. So I want as much freedom of choice as possible in the way people spend their money, but I want to regulate the government. That's what I want to regulate, not the people who have a right to petition the government.
So, Mr. Bonifaz, let me ask you about that. Just kind of playing off what Dr. Paul was saying there. How do you fix the situation here, especially dealing with the big money, if you don't have any money or you can't spend money in order to fix the situation?
that is the problem.
Right.
The American people
first
have to.
off, I want to be clear.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I want to be clear, though, just in terms of the congressman's statement. I agree that there are a lot of reasons why we see all this money coming into the political process, and the lobbyists and the kinds of gains they're going to make for their own clients or for corporate America. But the fact is that if we have a level playing field where everyone is treated equally, where we have mandatory limits on overall spending, including on independent expenditures, then I think we can go towards that basic promise of political equality for all. We also need other changes. We need public funding of elections. We need greater transparency. But at the end of the day, we can't have a system in which only those who have the means, have the funding, can compete and run for public office or have their voices heard. We have to have that level playing field, and that requires mandatory spending limits. Now, in terms of how does a movement get built to take on this problem and build a constitutional amendment fight, I think we're already seeing it in 4+ years since the Citizens United ruling. With very limited resources, 16 states have gone on record calling for this amendment, 500+ cities and towns. This is an issue that has cross-partisan appeal, from Democrats to Republicans to independents. In the state of Montana, 55% of the people in 2012 voted for Mitt Romney for president. 75% of those voters voted for a ballot initiative that we were part of at Free Speech for People, along with Common Cause, calling for a constitutional amendment. So the fact is that there is, I think, an opportunity here to seize on that basic vision that all of us share as Americans, regardless of our political affiliation, which is government of, for, and by the people, not of, for, and by corporations and big money interests.
Now, John, I'm going to direct this question at you, but Dr. Paul, I'd like you to weigh in after we get an answer. Does this money really produce results? That's the big question. I mean, how exactly is a campaign or candidate bought?
Well, for a lot of people it is, but my answer is that I was in Congress. The lobbyists didn't bother me. They never came. The big money, the people who had the PACs, they didn't come bothering me and say, hey, look, take this money, I'm going to get you in office. I mean, I went to the grassroots and got elected, and I think that's what we should do. We should have people who will go there and resist this temptation, and not the people have to wake up. If the people don't wake up and do something about it, and they listen to all the garbage they get off television, all those ads, there's enough freedom in this country for people to stand up and find the information more now than it used to be. And I just don't think that when we have a problem of too big a government, that the answer is making the government even bigger. I don't want that. I want an absolute right for you and me and anybody else to petition the government and have no regulations whatsoever.
Well, if I could just respond, I don't think anyone's talking about violating the basic right to petition the government here. We completely share the view that we have the right to petition our government. But money does not equal speech. The process of spending money in the political process is not petitioning your government. That's a very different thing. And as far as the bigger question of what does it buy, I think we already see what it buys. It buys a policy or a set of policies that caters far more to the moneyed interest than the rest of us. So we have fights over a living wage around the country, in large part because those with enormous amount of money fight the idea of a living wage. Or we have problems, as Congressman Paul highlights, with the military-industrial complex, but there's so much power, money power, coming from military contractors, defense industry, that effectively buys that policy. But the most important thing I really want to highlight here is that it also buys who gets in the first place. There are exceptions to the rule, no doubt, but the vast majority of candidates who are able to compete in this process first have to win that wealth primary. They first have to outraise and outspend their opponent in order to go on and win election. And if you're a teacher, if you're a bus driver, if you're engaged in a job that doesn't gain you enormous sums of money in the millions of dollars, you're not really going to have a fair shot in running for public office and getting elected, and nor are your voter supporters going to have a fair shot in having their voices heard. And that is detrimental to the basic promise of political equality for all and the vision of American democracy.
We're short on time here, so very quick answers, but I want to get in one more question for you both. Do you believe there should be some kind of legal divide between those who work as lobbyists who then turn around and run for office, which is happening in this election cycle, and also the converse, those who are elected to office who end their careers and then go work as lobbyists? Should we have a legal divide for that? Quick answers. Dr. Paul first.
No legal divide. Yet change the system where there's no incentive to have lobbyists and they don't get anything for lobbying because government doesn't hand out, largesse. They're not supposed to be there to pass out favors. So don't solve the problem of too big a government by having more government. So I would have no legal divide.
And John?
I agree with the legal divide. We have to stop this revolving door in which politicians come out of office, they become lobbyists, and vice versa. It's detrimental to government. I don't think that the answer of that, creating that legal divide, is undermining what Congressman Paul is saying. There are other issues around whether government should be big or small. We can agree to disagree on that. But at the end of the day, we have to have these restrictions in place if we're going to have a level playing field, or otherwise it's the highest bidder gets to be those in office or those who have that kind of power.
Thank you, both of you, so much. That was John Bonifaz, president of Free Speech for People, and former Congressman Dr. Ron Paul.